under a bruised Wild West sky, where the horizon bled gold into the dying light, rode Elias Boone, a giant cowboy of 30 years. His horse moved slow, hooves stirring the desert dust like whispers of forgotten time. Elias was a man shaped by silence, broad-shouldered, weathered, and carrying the quiet ache of one who'd seen too much of the world and too little kindness. Nights in the frontier had taught him to trust the wind, for it never lied, and to distrust his heart, for it never stayed still. That night the wind carried a cry. Faint at first, a woman's voice, strained with terror, echoing through the canyon. Elias halted, his gray eyes narrowing as he listened again. The cry came once more, sharp and desperate. He spurred his horse toward it, the moonlight flashing silver across his worn revolver. When he reached the ravine, he saw her, a young woman cornered by a snarling wolf, its eyes gleaming like embers in the dark. Ayanna Skye, the 20-year-old daughter of Chief Greyhawk, stood barefoot against the rock wall, her long dark hair tangled with feathers, her breath shallow. Fear shimmered in her eyes like moonlight on water, but her stance was proud even in danger. Elias dismounted without hesitation. He moved like thunder, sudden, unstoppable. The wolf lunged. Elias caught it midair with his lasso, pulling it back and striking with his knife in one swift, merciful motion. When the silence returned, only the rustle of leaves and her trembling breath remained. Elias turned toward her, his chest heaving, his shadow long against the canyon wall. "You're safe now," he said quietly. His voice was rough, like gravel softened by rain. She looked up at him, half in awe, half in disbelief. "You are not from our lands." "No," he said, offering his hand. "But danger don't care where a man's from." She hesitated, then placed her hand in his, small, warm, trembling. He helped her onto his horse. The stars above them glimmered faintly, as though the heavens themselves were watching. And as they rode through the night, a strange stillness settled between them, one that was neither fear nor gratitude, but something more mysterious, unspoken, fragile as dawn. When morning came, the world smelled of sage and smoke. They stopped near a quiet stream. Elias tended to her wounded ankle, his touch gentle despite his size. "You should rest here," he said softly. "Your people will come lookin'." Her eyes lingered on him, curious, questioning. "Why help me, stranger?" Elias didn't meet her gaze. "A man's got to do what lets him sleep at night." Before she could answer, the sound of hooves thundered through the valley. The ground trembled as riders approached, tribesmen, painted for battle. Ayanna's eyes widened. "My people," she whispered. The warriors arrived in a storm of dust and fury. Spears raised, voices shouting. At their front was Raven Arrow, the chief's fiercest warrior, and the man who had long watched Ayanna with a love she could not return. When he saw her beside the cowboy, his rage turned to wildfire. "Step away from her!" Raven roared, his horse circling Elias like a predator. "You dare steal the daughter of Chief Greyhawk?" Elias raised his hands, calm but alert. "She ain't been stolen. I found her in trouble, brought her back safe." Laughter broke from the warriors, sharp and mocking. "Lies!" Raven spat. "You think we'll believe the word of an outsider?" Before Ayanna could speak, Raven charged. Elias tried to hold his ground, but there were too many, men on all sides, ropes tightening around his arms. He didn't fight back, only shielded Ayanna with his body as they struck him down. "Stop!" Ayanna cried, her voice breaking. "He saved me. You're hurting the wrong man." But her words were swallowed by the chaos. They bound Elias and dragged him behind their horses, dust clouding his face. He didn't resist, though blood trickled from his brow. He looked at her once more, just once, and she felt something inside her chest splinter. Back in the village, the air was thick with tension. The tribe celebrated their princess's return, but Ayanna could not smile. Her father, Chief Greyhawk, sat before the fire, his expression hard. "Tell me what happened," he demanded. With trembling hands, she told the story, The canyon, the wolf, the rescue. Every word came like a confession. The chief listened in silence. When she finished, shame flickered across his proud face. He rose and went to the place where Elias had been kept. The cowboy was kneeling, bound but unbroken, his eyes steady as the chief approached. "My daughter says you saved her life," Gray Hawk said at last. "I wronged you." Elias said nothing, only met his gaze. The chief untied the ropes himself and handed Elias a white horse, sleek and strong. "Take this as our thanks. And take my apology." Elias nodded once. "Reckon that's more than I deserve." He turned to leave, the desert wind catching his coat. Ayanna watched him go, her throat tight. "Will I see you again?" she whispered. He didn't turn. "The wind's a lonely friend, princess. But sometimes it carries things back." Days passed. Nights too quiet, too long. Ayanna found herself wandering to the edge of the river, where the moonlight shimmered on the water like silver tears. She couldn't forget him, the way he'd risked his life for hers, the way silence had seemed to understand them better than words ever could. Far away, in a small cabin by the canyon rim, Elias sat by candlelight, writing. His handwriting was clumsy, the ink blotched in places, but his words came honest. "I don't know what it is I'm missin', but it has your eyes. Meet me by the river come sundown. I got something to say that don't fit in a letter." He folded the note, tied it to a bouquet of wildflowers, and sent it with a trader who often rode near the tribe's borders. When Ayanna received it, her heart thudded like a drum. She knew it was foolish, dangerous, but the pull was too strong. At sunset, she went. The river glowed amber beneath the lanterns Elias had hung between the trees. He stood there, tall and still, a nervousness in his eyes that didn't fit his size. When she appeared, it was as if the world exhaled. "You came," he said softly. "I had to." They spoke little. The air between them said what their lips couldn't. He handed her a single flower, petals trembling in his hand. "Guess I ain't good with words," he murmured. "But when I think of you, the world feels quieter." Her laughter was gentle. "And when I think of you, it feels louder." Elias smiled then, shy and hopeful. He went down on one knee, the lanterns flickering across his face. "Ayanna Sky," he said, "you don't owe me nothin'. But if there's even a chance you feel what I do, then maybe we can stop runnin' from the same wind." Her cheeks flushed. For a moment she said nothing, then whispered, "Yes." They danced under the moonlight, slow and clumsy, her hands lost in his. The river mirrored their joy. For once, the night held its breath. But peace in the Wild West was as fragile as morning mist. Word of their meeting reached the tribe. When Chief Gray Hawk learned what had passed, his fury was thunderous. He forbade his daughter from leaving the camp again. "You shame our blood," he thundered. "The world of his kind is not ours." Ayanna's eyes filled, but she did not argue. Her heart beat rebelliously beneath the weight of duty. Outside her tent, Raven Arrow stood watch, his face tight with jealousy. Days turned into restless silence. Elias waited by the river each evening until the stars grew weary of seeing him. He began to think love had tricked him again. Then came the sickness. Ayanna collapsed one morning, pale and trembling. The tribe's healer spoke gravely. The cure, a rare herb, grew beyond the mountains, where only the desperate or the damned would ride. The news reached Elias through a passing trader. Before dawn, he saddled his horse and set off without a word. Storms rose, paths vanished beneath mud and rock. His hands bled from the reins, his lips cracked, but he rode harder. When the fevered wind screamed in his ears, he thought only of her face, of the way her name sounded like prayer. Days later, battered and half delirious, he returned, herbs bound in cloth, horse staggering beneath exhaustion. The guards raised their weapons when he arrived at the tribe's gates, but the chief saw the truth in his eyes. "Let him through," Gray Hawk commanded. Elias placed the medicine into the healer's hands, then collapsed into the dust. "Give it to her," he murmured. "Don't waste time." For a week, He lay outside the camp, refusing rest until he heard she'd recovered. When Iona finally stepped from her tent, color returned to her cheeks, her eyes bright with tears. She walked to him and knelt. "You came for me again." He smiled weakly. "Reckon I didn't know how not to." Chief Gray Hawk stood before them. His voice was quieter now, heavy with the weight of a humbled heart. "Twice you have saved what is most precious to me," he said. "A man who carries such courage and such love deserves no chains between our worlds." He took his daughter's hand and placed it in Elias's. "You have my blessing." That night, beneath a sky blazing with stars, the tribe gathered. Drums echoed softly, blending with the whisper of the river. Elias and Iona stood before the fire, their hands bound together with a red cord of unity. As the flames flickered, she leaned close and whispered, "Do you think the stars will remember us?" He smiled. "If they don't, the wind will." Their kiss was gentle, uncertain, like two hearts learning to speak the same language. Around them, the tribe cheered, and the night swelled with laughter and music. But for Elias, the world narrowed to the warmth of her touch and the quiet miracle of belonging. The old storyteller who would one day tell their tale, Old Marrow, said he saw them ride away the next morning, hand in hand, into a sunrise the color of new beginnings. "I once met a man," he would later whisper by firelight, "who stood taller than any mountain not because of his size, but because of the love he carried. And I once met a woman brave enough to follow her heart beyond the borders of fear." He looked into the flames, voice softening. "So remember, child, sometimes the bravest thing a soul can do is to keep its tenderness in a world that forgets how to be kind. And somewhere, out there by the river where it all began, lanterns still glow. The wind still carries the sound of laughter and hoofbeats fading into forever. And if you listen closely, you might still hear it, the quiet, faithful beating of two hearts that refuse to give up."